I think that the reforms that that Francesco has discussed are the same that we did a bit before maybe, and proved very efficient in accelerating the recovery. We had a labor market reform, which was important, which the market and the investors were asking for. We had a very good reform of the REIT system, the famous SOCIMI, which is in 2009 we launched the first SOCIMI regime, which was completely unsuccessful, and the government was truly very daring, changing the system in a way that is very tax efficient, that is very flexible, that it's suitable for several kind of investors, from family offices to big listed REITs to just tax vehicles with very flexible listing requirements, for example. So we are seeing this kind of reforms, which I think were a catalyzer for the investment. I think because investors saw a cost opportunity, so that the market was hitting the floor, together with also, I think it's a political and financial reform, which is the bank restructuring. We actually did a very strong bank restructuring. We killed most of the savings and loans banks we had. We nationalized Bankia, which was one of the biggest banks in Spain, and this, I think, has allowed to have has allowed from the market perspective, has made a lot of assets going into the market. So it has fostered the market, and we now have, for example, a much healthier basis for financing. The banks are now lending on a healthy basis. I agree with what was said before. They're starting maybe to do again the same mistakes they promised they will never do, but that's life. We have fish memories, that's true.
Christopher, did you want to pick up on that topic?
Yes, I wanted to stress a little bit the REIT issue in Spain, because that has one of the really important and impacting factors in the last year. The reforms that were introduced, I believe, in 2012 or 13, actually made the Spanish REIT, the SOCIMI, something that is highly tax efficient, is basically something close to a zero taxes thing, because you don't have any transfer tax on the SOCIMI. You don't have any corporate taxes, which is 30% usually in Spain, which is a huge reduction, actually, if you have an SPV structure. And then dividends are only being taxed on the personal investors level. So that means, and you don't have any stamp duties. So I think it was really the due and the most driving and most effective tax incentive that has driven and geared this market to the point where it is. And the last year, of the 7.58 billion that were invested, it was 2.5 that were invested by SOCIMIs. So that means that's a 30% market share. And there's money in those REITs which come from the likes of George Soros or Warren Buffett, which means the indirect investment into the market of Spain has been driven by these vehicles. And I think that has been something that's really been a driver. And on another issue, but similar to that, there's a bit of a hygiene process going on in the real estate world as well. And I was on a panel 2 weeks ago for the Spanish Office Association, talking about transparency of the market. And the Spanish Office Association is a club that has been formed 10 years ago, where most of the corporates like Telefonica, energy providers, and real estate investors are present. And in the last 2 years, actually, they have become much more active, seeing the dynamics of the market. And there's for example, something being introduced since last year that's called a standard for space measurements, which means they've agreed finally in Spain that they want to have a common standard for letting areas, because so far, until now, you could have anything from gross constructed, carpet area, or something that they call cuerpo cierto, which means it's simply the full body of the building, meaning I'll let you that building for 1 million per annum, and you take it as it is, which is highly confusing for an investor when he wants to do his valuation based on square meters. So that is something that gives more transparency. They're about to issue later this year another standard which tries to categorize buildings as we know it from other markets. So there's going to be something close to Class A, B, C buildings in Spain, which is probably going to drive that as well. And finally, I've read this week that the RICS is also insisting on having the Red Book being applied on valuations by any of the valuers working as representatives of the RICS. Another factor that hasn't been introduced so far. So what I found out in preparing the workshop 2 weeks ago with the association was that whenever it comes to quantum leaps, say, in the market, in the investment market, like we're seeing it now and like we saw it in the early 2000s, transparency increases tremendously because there's actually a pressure. And that pressure comes through the money and the demands and the requirements of the investors, and the market actually corresponds to that. And I think this is good news because Spain is going to respond to that, and I hope and I think that we're going to have a bit more transparent market also in those aspects, apart from the macroeconomics.